Good morning, everyone. You're expecting to somebody else, but there's a change. So we're adapting to changes in our environment. That's something that we have to do every day. So we're going to start with our special session, Innovation and Technology in Global Supply Chains, Competition among Korea, US, and China and Japan. We have distinguished professors here for these topics. And we're going to start with Professor Paul Hong, University of Toledo. He's a distinguished university professor at the University of Toledo. He has been really famous scholar in supply chain area, and he has been publishing a lot of books and working together with many internationally distinguished professors here. So let us first introduce having Professor Paul Hong on our session. So Professor Hong, whenever you're ready,
thank you.
You take it over.
Yeah, I'm ready. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Ho. The title is Managing Global Supply Chain in a Post-Pandemic World, a Perspective in the United States. So this presentation examines the three priorities of the U.S. in managing global supply chains, its implications in the post-pandemic world, okay? So because it's only 10 minutes, I'll be a great deal of abstraction and generalities, right? Now, this week, the vivid image of Taliban's victory in Afghanistan suggests the outcomes of strategic and political blunders that is waging a long war alone without prudent exit plans and enduring purpose. This makes me to return to the 2 points of my 2020 book, Rising Asia and American Hegemony. The 2 points are Rising Asia is becoming a center stage of world affairs, and American hegemony, that is American advantageous leadership position in the world, is related to managing global supply chains. Today, I briefly summarize the three U.S. supply chain priorities. First, prosper in the post-pandemic world. At the outbreak of COVID-19, there were big surprises and great deal of casualties. Soon the US administration decided to focus on developing vaccines with appropriate federal aid, about $2.6 billion or more. And vaccine development of this magnitude usually takes even 5 or even 10 years, but within 1 year, with the public and private this collaboration, vaccines by Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson now available, and they are being distributed. US Congress approved massive fiscal expenditures in the form of stimulus packages, infrastructure bills, more than $5.3 trillion. In extraordinary circumstances, US government support major strategic innovative initiatives apart from normal market rate of return investment criteria. For example, 2008, about $831 billion USD. Fiscal package included a huge innovation support fund for shale gas exploration. With such support, many firms dared to do shale gas projects, which were once regarded too expensive and unprofitable. A decade later, by 2018, US could achieve energy independence, no longer need to depend on oil from Middle East. Similarly, the potential future benefits of COVID-19 expenditures, about 8 times of this fiscal crisis package, might be in the form of numerous new green and growth engine innovations, which regarded once not so profitable and reasonable. Second, rebuild production and innovation capabilities. In June 2021, Biden administration issued an executive order on building resilient supply chains, revitalizing American manufacturing and fostering broad-based growth. 4 areas of strategic concentration are: number 1, semiconductors, large capacity batteries, critical minerals and materials, and pharmaceutical and active pharmaceutical ingredients. For an illustration, let me just talk briefly about semiconductor global supply chain. Semiconductors, as you know, are an essential component of manufacturing products and countless other applications. 3 of its supply chain processes are design and manufacturing with a front end and back end. U.S. advantage here is mostly in design and front-end manufacturing, along with Korea and other countries, and while capturing about 38% of overall value chain, this value chain. So compared to 9% of China and 9% of Taiwan, 16% of Korea, 14% Japan, and 10% of the European Union. And the 25% of global semiconductor consumption is in the US market, 20% is in China market. The goal is now to strengthen even back-end manufacturing capabilities within US or close to US. On June 8, 2021, the US Senate adopted Innovation and Competition Act, which aims to boost US semiconductor production, so $52 billion, and National Science Foundation, $81 billion, and intellectual property enforcement. It clearly states the growing economic, technological, military competition from China. So we know what this, the act is retargeting. Third, strengthen international alliance and trade rules. Now this map shows the US key allies, Canada, UK, Germany, Poland, Australia, and Korea. These are in dark green, and then other friendly nations such as Japan, Vietnam, India, and these countries are in light green. US allies are actively engaged in trade with the United States, Mexico, Canada, China, Mexico, Canada, Japan, Germany, and South Korea. And then US deploys its military these forces. Japan 55,000, Germany 34,000, and South Korea 26,000. So by seeing this, the South Korea is very highly regarded this ally. Just overall this history. Since 1939, US adapted its alliance patterns in waging major wars, World War II, Cold War, Korean War, and the Vietnam War, and so forth. Korea is a successful showcase, along with Germany and Japan, whereas Vietnam and now Afghanistan are quite the opposite. The ultimate outcomes are to be seen. With Nixon's visit to China in 1972, there has been huge global supply chain buildup and rising China.
Professor
Now,
Hong,
rivalry with China is taken very seriously with the national consensus.
Professor Hong, can you wrapping up within 1 minute, 40 seconds,
Okay, so
please?
then I will just go over this very briefly. So here, this is U.S. Allies, and Korea is a peculiar ally in that many initiatives, the South Korea say no in relation to China compared to others. And another one is the strengthening international alliance, and there's a 3A collaborate with the new frontier innovation areas, build on US Korea's strategic partnership, and coordinate joint efforts in North Korea and beyond. And so my conclusion here is top 3 U.S. supply chain priorities are prosper in the post-pandemic world, rebuild production of its capabilities, strengthen international alliance trade rules, and the point is U.S. redefines alliance goals, deploy supply chain resources for its long-term national interest. So the U.S.-Korea partnership is experiencing golden era in pursuing their shared interest, global supply chain goals for safety, security, and sustainability, and together. Because of time constraint, I could not really talk about more in details, but I think you can see my slides later, okay? Thank you. This is my
Thank you very
presentation.
much, Professor Paul Hong. Actually, he's proud alumni of this Yonsei University, so he kindly shared the email. So if you have any question, feel free to let him know. So thank you. And our next speaker, President of KIEP, Hung Jong Kim. Actually, he is also President of APEC Korea. Please welcome Professor and President Hung Jong Kim, please.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me to speak today. I am Hung Jong Kim. I'm a president of the Korea Institute for International Policy and also the Korea Association of the APEC Studies. I'm very happy here to speak about the global supply chain with you. I'll share my views on recent changes in actually global supply chains and Korea's response to this change. My presentation is beginning with the current situation of global supply chains, and following this, I'll talk about the GSC in the post-pandemic era, and then followed by the Korea's response. Okay, as globalization proceeds, an international production network has formed, within which individual nations specialize in a specific production role. Instead of a global value chain, the concept of a global supply chain has become more important when understanding today's global economy. The purpose of a global value chain is to create more value added. The focus is on economic efficiency. However, one of the lessons we have learned from the strategic competition between the United States and China and the COVID-19 pandemic is how this division of labor across the GVCs poses a risk to supply chain. Starting from the global financial crisis, the expanding trend in global supply chain has been in decline. Across all continents, trade of intermediate goods has sharply fallen from the pre-global financial crisis level. Here we can see the changes in intermediate goods trade in the 4 countries of Korea, the United States, China, and Japan. The first graph shows how Korea's dependence on import from China has continued to grow over the past 20 years. During the same period, Korea's import dependence on Japan has fallen, and that on the US has begun to level out. The restriction of the global supply chain was in motion even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Various factors are involved, including technology and innovation, with these having an interactive effect on the GSC. The first fact is the rise of China, of course. As its economy continues to grow, China is transforming from a production base to a market for consumption, forming a supply chain centered on China. At the same time, globalization has expanded the inequality in advanced nations. Together with the rise in unemployment, we are seeing a rise in trade protectionism to protect domestic industries and laborers. Meanwhile, conflict at the diplomatic and security levels have developed into trade dispute. This has motivated the nations to produce key industrial materials on their own. Automation is a good example of how technology and innovation impact the GSC. Automation has the impact of lowering capital cost, which in turn reduces the attraction to low-cost labor. This promotes reshoring efforts in advanced economies and limits the participation of developing economies in the GSC. Coming into the 2000s, regional trade agreements have rapidly increased across the world. The rules of origin set under these RTAs must be met to enjoy the preferential tariff rates, and a majority are related to regional value content or RVCs. Supply chains that rely on just-in-time practices are vulnerable to natural disasters. Global industries have come to prefer a safer production system even when less efficient. They are reducing their dependence on any particular country and shortening their supply chains in key industries or diversifying their sources. The COVID-19 pandemic will speed up the reorganization of GSC, and this is closely related to technology innovation. The recent US-China conflict is, in essence, a competition to gain tech hegemony. That is, a competition to realize the opportunities under these changes. Tech innovation will also be crucial for sustainable development and also digital transformation. Okay, here we can see how national ranking in tech sectors have changed over the years based on the number of patents filed in 10 key technology areas in the year of 2000, 2010, and 2017. As you can see, the United States and Japan used to dominate these tech sectors in the past, but in the year 2017, the most recent year, China has taken the lead in all areas except for quantum computing. Advanced in cutting-edge, dual-use technology are closely linked to security issues and hegemony. This is why China's rapid rise in technology is at the root of conflict between the United States and China. The White House released the 100-day assessment of the supply chain, and Professor Paul Hong have already mentioned this part, so I will pass this area. Okay. Digital transformation is at the core of this trend. This involved in integration of new technologies, for instance, IoT, big data, AI, additive manufacturing, and robot industry, all into a single and integrated system. And advance in hardware is needed as well. The pace of hardware development will decide how fast digital transformation proceeds in the end. And the ability to secure key technologies, materials, components, and equipment could well be a declining factor of success. As the issues of sustainable development gains more interest, the international community is pursuing measures to cope with climate change more actively than ever. Korea, the US, Japan have announced plans to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and China by 2060. These goals will require development in green technology. The areas of renewable energy, nuclear power generation, green hydrogen manufacturing technologies are receiving attention. Global supply chains are closely linked to climate changes because of the issues of carbon leakage. On July the 14th, the EU released further details on the carbon border adjustment mechanism in the Fit for 55 package. This will have an impact on the formation of green supply chain. In addition to climate change response, more efforts are being made to realize universal value. A good example is the emphasis of ESG. The European Parliament will be announcing legislation later this year that will require companies to address human rights and environmental standards in their operations. Business failing to comply with the ESG will in the long run find it difficult to participate in the global supply chain. Then, how can we expect the GSG to take form in the future? The emphasis on stability will move production bases close to market and demand. Supplier of intermediate goods will be diversified, which will form regional supply chains compared with multiple focal points. As a result, we expect the supply chain blocks to form in the EU, centered on Germany, in North America, centered on the United States, and possibly in Asia, centered on China. These focal points represent areas with advanced technology or large market and demand. Korea has also formulated a response to this reorganization of global supply chain. The main content of this plan involves research and development and investment in infrastructure. And so, Korea is aiming to emerge as a hub for advanced technology that leads the global supply chain and innovation. The government will invest over 5 trillion won in tech projects, and the private sector will invest 510 trillion won and 40 trillion won in the K semiconductor and K battery areas, respectively. The Korean government has expanded the number of items subject to supply chain management from 100 to more than 338. The Korea New Deal 2.0 is being pursued as an infrastructure investment to realize the digital transformation and carbon neutrality. The Korean New Deal, and we are entering an era of the division as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. International cooperation must proceed in a direct direction where post-pandemic changes can benefit all. The first is to establish a level playing field. This means to promote a fair competition and establish international standard on digital information to produce positive spillover effect. Second is to form sustainable global supply chain. We need international standard on universal values and climate change's response, and we must support developing economies and small to mid-sized firms to participate in the GSC. Lastly, we could consider cooperation in R&D and infrastructure investment. Such cooperation could take place by project in science and technology areas where each country is interested in. I'm aware that many countries around the world are engaged in similar policies to the Korean New Deal. This area could be an excellent opportunity for cooperation and benefit for all. And this conclusion is my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Kim. Chinese speaker is our next presenter, Professor Gao Shedong, who is a professor at Tsinghua University right after his PhD at MIT. He has been editor and editorial board of many journals. He is also chief professor of Schwarzman College. Schwarzman, Blackstone chairperson, donated $100 million to Tsinghua. He's in charge of that. Please welcome Professor Gao.
Thank you very much, Professor Shin. It's really a pleasure to have an opportunity to get together and share, some ideas with colleagues from, Korea, Japan, and US. Let me share my screen. Actually, it's more than a supply chain challenge. So we need to deal with this challenge. Let me start with the first one. So this is definitely a huge challenge. For example, Huawei, because of the U.S. policy change, had suffered a lot. In addition to the telecom network equipment business, the handset business is heavily, suffered. The market share has dropped dramatically. Not only Huawei, many other companies, Chinese companies, actually not only companies, but even universities are now being put on the identity list of the US government. At the same time, we can say some, companies, actually many US companies are making much more money than before the change of the US-China relationship. So this is definitely a supply chain challenge, but it's more than that. The impact on the state of mindset, Chinese people's understanding of the US is changing very rapidly. First, Chinese people just do not understand why the US government is having this kind of policy. Accordingly, the US reputation in China is heavily damaged. Of course, some other countries' reputation improved. This is not only happening to ordinary people, it's happening to government officials, but more importantly, it's happening to intellectuals. Scholars, many scholars, I think, before this relationship change, have a really very good understanding about the US. many of them believing the US is a model for economic development and social development. But now, Chinese intellectuals are changing their mindset. So how can we deal with this kind of, value chain security challenge? It's very natural. Economic decoupling pushed by the US is a reality. And many people, many firms, both local and foreign, at least in the short run, will be negatively affected. So a consensus is emerging. So indigenous innovation, especially technological innovation, is the way out. And also building up a supply chain that could be, controlled by the Chinese economy. So there is no choice. But in the long run, probably this is a better choice. And more people, more and more companies began to realize this. This is a very big challenge, a very big change. Because before this, for more than 40 years, China's strategy, economic development strategy, is to join the US-dominated, US-controlled supply chain. And that worked pretty well for many years. So at that time, collaboration, free trade, benefiting from each other is the norm. But now, almost everything is changing. So indigenous innovation is the most important policy, most important strategy for the decades to come. Also, I think develop a secure value chain depends not only on indigenous innovation, but also depending on selecting the right partners. What do you mean by that? It's selecting the right countries and the right firms, or even the right people to work with. As I mentioned earlier, for the past more than 40 years, China just opened the door, opened the market, opened the society to the whole world. But now it's understood that some countries are not as friendly as expected. So China needs to be selective in picking the partners. Some countries are good partners, but some countries are not. So this also means a very big policy change. Finally, I think it's very important to think about what is the right international economic order. Open economy, as China did in the past more than 40 years, free trade, is that the right choice, the right decision, right policy? Or we need to be very selective about China's partners, including countries and companies. So this is something I think is very challenging, but very important. People in China and all over the world, I think we need to pay attention to this issue, which is also a challenge. Some study actually suggest in the future, there will be two economic systems. One system is led by the US, as Professor Paul Hong mentioned. US really want to work together with its allies to create something that is not really good for China. But at the same time, many studies suggest China actually is emerging as one of the leaders, probably the most potential leader in the world. So in this sense, China also has its own allies, its own partners. So I think this is something we need to really think about. I strongly believe a world following the principle of open economy, free trade, that is good. But the reality might be more a challenge. We really need to think about how to deal with this challenge. It's not only one country, but the whole world. Thank you very much. I just share some idea based on our research. I hope this is helpful for our thinking about the future of supply chain security. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just in time. I look forward to meeting you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Josuke Ikegami, professor at Waseda University. He is now currently Associate Dean of Waseda Business School. He is now speaking to 1,000 Japanese business leaders and taking time for our special session. I'm really grateful. And he is also country director of AIB Japan. Please welcome JJ, Professor Ikegami.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to such a horrible situation. So, and then considering the time, I'll jump into the presentation. I've been in charge of the Waseda Business School's executive education, and we are teaching about roughly one third of the top 100 Japanese companies. And then after I get these requests, I've asked some senior executives on how they are coping with these global supply chains after the COVID-19. And then one interesting thing, what I found is, I didn't write in this paper, but is they expanded the notion of global supply chains, not only from the manufacturing to more service business. Why so is, after the COVID-19, they found they need to include inbound tourism as a part of global supply chain. Why so is, until the COVID-19, one of the most rapidly expanding business area in Japan was inbound tourism. And then, as you all may know, that the inbound tourism will be counted as a part of trade. And then inbound tourism, in terms of value, tourism ranked number 2 in the trade items in Japan. And then all of a sudden, inbound tourism, as you may all know, dropped dramatically. Yeah. And then they all realized, oh my gosh, right? Inbound tourism and then how to maintain it is a very important part of global supply chain. That's one very interesting findings. And then so far, I think no one has studied yet, including me, right? And then B is this one. So after the COVID-19, quite a lot of Japanese manufacturing companies here, and I moved to manufacturing companies, global supply chain. Quite a lot of manufacturing companies shifted their, focus or emphasis on the global supply chain from recovering to the protection. Okay. So as you may know, Japan has a lot of natural disasters, and then also we are pretty good in recovering from visible disasters in Japan and also from outside Japan. And then because Japan and Germany is maybe only the two G7 companies whose manufacturing portion exceeds more than 20% of total GDP. So we have to pay attention. And at the time, main focus has been recovering. So we are more reactive. But after the COVID-19, quite a lot of senior executives in manufacturing shifted, of course, on top of recovering, so they shifted the focus from recovering to protection. And then protection in their hometown in Japan, right? So of course they have to they know they have to pay attention to the global supply chain, but in order to have a good global supply chain, they have to have a secure mother base, okay? So mother factory in Japan. So they think about, all right, they haven't paid a lot of attention. They pay a lot of attention, but they didn't pay a lot of attention to the protection on the invisible global disaster. So they really think about how to manage and protect the flow of people, goods, and information. So those are the 10 key points which I heard also studied from Professor Fujimoto, who were in Tokyo University, and she moved to Waseda University this year. And then this comes from the discussion from Professor Fujimoto. But so these are the common sense. Actually, those 10 points are the common sense for maybe you. One is movement. So they, in order to manage and to protect the flow of people, goods, and information. One is movement of people at factory entrance, exit, and the material brought into the factory, they check it, and satellite management including washing hands or disinfection, right? And maintenance of physical distance in the factory, and reduction in the number of people coming to work, and then change the time difference, and then prevention of infection during commuting, health management of employees at home. This is actually quite important. They monitor and then have to report how their health situation at home, including their family in many cases. And then prevention of infection during commuting, okay, and management of products being taken out of the factory, promote disinfection and other response in the event of infection in the factory, of course, and then recovery support for infected upstream and downstream plants and suppliers. All these are a kind of common sense, but the point is they execute it solely and apply the Kaizen method in this protection of invisible global disaster needs. That's one thing. So, and then, so on top of it, these days, they also put emphasis on expanding triangular supply chain. Here in triangular supply chain means, of course, they have overseas country factory like C, that is mainly for domestic market. And then they put more emphasis on top of this overseas country, one, number two is other Asian factories, B. This is mainly for global transportation base. And then they also restarted domestic factories in Japan. So this is based for strengthening international competitiveness. So in past 10 years, quite a lot of Japanese manufacturing companies focus on making some factory in the domestic market and then arrange the global supply chain based on that assumption. That the past few years, actually, they increase the number into the +1 strategy, based on the +1 strategy as a global transportation base. Yeah? And the quite recent trend is somehow because of the costs of production in Japan is decreasing compared to the other countries in past few years. So some companies restarted of domestic factories in Japan. So in that way, they're preparing for the global, some protection power of the global disasters. So that's the key summary of COVID-19 impact on global supply chain. And then other part is just the addition. Actually, I have some 7 pages, but most of them are just reference. My main message is this page 1. And other thing is just giving you some information that so Japanese companies shifting their emphasis on more for B2B businesses rather than B2C, especially in the global market. Okay, and then they're expanding. Their intention of expanding the factory is in total volume has not increased, but those who are interested in the global expansion is planning to expand their operation. And then these are some companies where they are looking for. So Vietnam, Thailand, yeah. So this is coming from the research from JETRO. So number one, the +1 area is Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. Okay. And then one key area is when they think about the global supply chain, they all of a sudden sustainability come to the core strategy when they think about the global supply chain. So they need to monitor and control overall carbon neutrality of supply chain. Okay, and then so because of that, energy import supply chain will be the continuous key issue. And when the final part is when I'm teaching those senior executives and their supply chain and all things, all of a sudden, geopolitics has become the key study area for them. As the previous professors mentioned, the global supply chain has a strong influence on the geopolitics. So these days, most of the senior executives want to learn about the geopolitics. That's one key figure. Okay, yeah, that's from my side.
Thank you very much, JJ. You can go back to your speech actually for Japanese executive. We already completed all 4 guest presentation. Belated introduction. My name is Kwon Chul-shin, professor at Kyung University. Feel free to ask any kind of question, send me an email. I will send them and then make sure all 4 speakers can have a proper feedback to all of your questions. Actually, our first speaker, Professor Paul Hong, he wrote numerous papers, a few hundred papers in major journals, and he will be also speaker for APBR workshop here in Seoul. Actually, Kyung University hosting, but due to COVID-19, it's a Zoom conference. Feel free to get access to APBR journal website. You can get access to all those presentations free of charge this coming 20th. I'm also editorial board of APBR. Actually, the editor is Professor Chris Rowley and Oxford University. We cannot have any kind of conference. Actually, due to COVID, we have a Zoom conference. And also our second speaker is a professor. Actually, he's president of KIEP, 대외경제정책연구원. So he has a lot of resources. As you may know, Korea hosting APEC Summit year 2025. So we may get out of COVID-19 at the time. And then we have a lot of opportunities to collaborate with the most powerful government think tank, KIEP. So he is also president of APEC Studies Association. So I hope we may have all kinds of access to all those resources, as KIEP is our APEC consortium in Korea. And also they may help us to publish more papers in Asia Pacific region. Our third speaker was Gao Xiaodong. Actually, he is in charge of Schwarzman College. I didn't notice, but Stephen donated $100 million to 융합 program. So he's in charge as the chair of the program. And everything is free, including tuition fee. So you may encourage your students to study that program. And I was impressed because he has all kinds of extensive networks in corporate sector in entire China. So we may have more collaboration in the future. As you know, the Schwarzman also donated more than $350 million to MIT. That's why MIT is focusing on AI program, thanks to Stephen Schwarzman with $1 billion. Our final speaker was JJ Ikegami. As he said, recently, Professor Fujimoto at Tokyo University joined Waseda. So they have the most powerful global supply chain program in Japan. So we may have a more extensive program, as is assuming that Waseda's associate dean, he has a lot of contacts in Japanese business community. So he's a rising star, so we may have more collaboration in the future. And almost time, so again, feel free to let me know any questions for those 4 speakers. And this will conclude officially our special session on innovation and technology in global supply chains. Thank you very much.